of riding a motorcycle had been turned into a game. There was a competition event for everything.
Follow the crowd, follow the crowd, come with me, for he's so proud.
The sporting side of it was a big thing, and it wasn't just racing, there was all the club side of it. Every person who was into motorcycles in the 20s would have been in a club. There would have been this huge community, and they wouldn't have just raced, they would have done sort of hill climbs and grass tracks and kind of, they used to do trials, and they'd even do like pillion trials where you'd have someone on the back of the bike to do a trial, and long distance trials, and there was always some kind of club involvement in it all.
Come and follow the crowd.
Despite their popularity, bikes were seen as challenging and somehow apart from other pursuits, even on the racing scene. Motorbikes started to be perceived in a different way to their four-wheeled rivals.
You still get people just riding around in their normal clothes, although in the racing scene you do start to see stuff developing. The car drivers would always wear white suits, nice clean white helmets and goggles. They were sort of pristinely turned out, so you've got a black leather-clad motorcyclist covered in dirt who, you know, whizzes around lap after lap after lap getting dirty. I don't know, it just, there is this real sort of separation.
The feeling that bikes were a bit different was apparent at the prestigious Brooklands circuit. It was one of the only custom-built racetracks in the world and had been an important part of the bike scene from the beginning. Yet even here, bikers were becoming outsiders.
Brooklands is the most prominent British race circuit that closes in 1939. At that time, there was a real hierarchy of the establishment in the racing community. The motorcycle racers weren't allowed into the clubhouse at Brooklands, whereas the car racers were. They were looked down upon even in that scene as well.
But there was one place where the riders were already king: the Isle of Man Tourist Trophy, or TT races. The event was founded in the early 1900s on the Isle of Man, after racing on the roads in mainland Britain had become outlawed. The place became the spiritual home of British bikers. Raced over a 37-mile mountainous circuit, the TT was a challenging time trial against the clock, testing courage to the full.
There really is nothing else like it in the world. There wasn't back then, and I guess there isn't now.
The TT races are about to begin, and all the competitors are lined up. There's a great deal of activity going on at the moment around the starting point.
The rider would come face to face with the starter, who would have his flag in the air, and the guy would set his bike as he wanted it to start.
Oh yes, the starter's flag is going up, and he's watching his chronometer, ready to give the signal for number 1, that's Frith, to start on the stroke of 11. And there goes the starter's flag, great thing to sight now.
As the flag drops, he would push, run, with the clutch held in, then he'd let his clutch out and jump onto the saddle.
He's away.
And he would be hoping that it would fire and run straight away and off he'd charge. And most of the time, especially the top guys, they would.
Number 2.
They would have got it worked out to such a degree that they'd know how many steps to take before jumping on the bike. It perhaps looks a bit rudimentary or a bit kind of basic, but there was actually an awful lot of science and a lot of thought would have gone into it. Nothing would have been left to chance.
Unlike Brooklands, the TT track was on everyday roads, a far more familiar environment for the average rider, despite its pitfalls.
It is a 37-mile track, which are public roads, with hairpins and hills and bumps and villages.
A rough road surface with drain covers and curbs and walls and hedges.
Over a mountain, the variation of the course itself, the different conditions.
It's at Ramsey that the mountain course begins, the hardest part of the run. And incidentally, the course passes through some of the most beautiful scenery in the island. But you may be sure the fleeting riders are too occupied to notice it.
They touch today 180, but in the 30s they would have been doing the ton. parlance for 100 miles an hour, and on the Sulby Straight, speeds there would have approached 110, 120.
Jimmy Guthrie is leading all the way, setting a cracking pace at an average of nearly 80 miles an hour. Slowing up on the turns, can you imagine what his top speed must be?
It was an extreme race that required equally extreme commitment.
Some of the guys would hold the throttles open by various means, like of elastic bands and things, and just hang on. That was as simple as that. Really, they were running quite close to flat out an awful lot of the time.
He's coming down now, round windy, very wide sweep. Here he comes, I can just spot him. And according to my timing, he's winning.
How they managed to achieve the lap times that they did on the machines of that time, in the conditions, on those roads, incredible. Incredible, guys.
The enormous strain on both driver and machine in this grueling 265 miles race can only be appreciated when we realise that they fly around the course for nearly 3.5 hours on end. Difficult corners and a 7-mile climb in each of the 7 laps makes it a thrilling sight for the spectators and a more thrilling struggle for the drivers.
To handle the stresses and strains of such an arduous race, the TT racer of the 1930s needed to be a hardy breed.
When you're riding a bike which has got no real suspension, saddles are not brilliantly comfortable, and it's a fairly ferocious thing. There was no kind of let up. It was really, really physical, hard work. These were fit guys who were doing it.
If the riders were tough, the bikes had to be even tougher. For the bike companies, there was more than just pride at stake.
This really can't be underestimated, its importance in terms of motorcycle development.
The TT was an absolutely marvellous proving ground for manufacturers in an era when people were concerned about reliability. Naturally, we buy something today, it's not going to break. Very different time then. And so for a manufacturer to be confident enough to put their machine through 2-3 laps, what better place to prove the reliability of their machine?
As the technology raced ahead, one manufacturer excelled above all others, Norton. For them, winning the TT became an expectation, and wins meant sales.
Often the phrase was, well, which Norton won the TT this year? Not which bike, but which Norton. They dominated.
They had the best riders riding for them. The bikes were the toughest, probably the fastest.
The winner, who by the way won the junior TT earlier in the week, was Guthrie on a Norton with an average speed of 78.01 miles an hour.
You could see the aces riding the bikes that you could buy, racing, and that was a hell of a thing at the time.
The local sales room could give you a road version of the very machine that had just won the world's toughest race. Norton's international model was the closest thing to the TT dream the average rider could buy. But Norton's winning streak would be rudely interrupted by world events.
In 1938, Norton won the TT, but for 1939 they virtually withdrew from international racing because they'd started to build bikes for the army.
In 1939, as Britain geared up for war with Germany, there was another team waiting to take Norton's place, BMW.
People know it as the Nazi TT, where the German entrants really basically turned up uniformed and jackbooted.
The Nazi Party had taken control of German motorsport, investing heavily in racing technology. BMW had the world champion George Meyer, and bikes that were far ahead of the competition.
German government, of course, were behind their car racing and their motorcycle racing efforts, and in the motorcycling that extended to all classes, with BMW in the 500. The German bikes were actually very good with their shaft drive.
With no Norton factory team to rival them, BMW won first and second places in the senior race.
BMW did win that race, exciting race, no bones about that. And the Germans, that was the first time, if you like, that they'd planted a flag on the top of our mountain.
BMW's second-place rider was British man Jock West, shown on the right. He chose not to join in with his team's victory salute. Just 3 months after the TT, Britain was at war with Germany, and the motorbike would be put to military use. Men to ride them also had to be commandeered. Ron Arnold was one of them.
I had no thought at all of riding a motorcycle. Before joining the army, I couldn't drive. I had to specialise in something. Everybody had to specialise. So I became a dispatch rider.
In addition to mechanical systems, the human method of communication still ranks very high in modern war. The dispatch rider is most able to cope with rapidly changing conditions. Upon his shoulders rests the responsibility of maintaining contact between the many positions in the field, even before the more permanent methods of communication have been established.
I think they first gave me a BSA.
Known as DRs, dispatch riders and their bikes were expected to operate in any weather conditions and deliver messages wherever they were ordered to.
In due course, bit by bit, they provided me with the rest of it.
Here, the wise DR does things methodically and takes care in his dressing.
Double texture, rubber, coat, almost down to the ankles. Pair of goggles. They taught me how to ride a motorcycle and how to use a map that other people could understand what I was referred to on that map.
Trained to adjust himself rapidly and thoroughly, there's little that a fully fledged DR doesn't know about finding his way, not only with maps, but by making use of his own powers of observation.
You're also issued with a dispatch bag.
You've got to be there by 6. Very good, sir. I'll be there.
I never bother to look what's in it. It's handed to me. I put it around my neck. I go. I deliver it to my officer.
As well as his supposedly weatherproof uniform, the dispatch rider depended on his bike. Birmingham Small Arms, or BSA, were the most common bike in the field, but not always the most popular.
I found the BSA quite cumbersome. It'd be a good road bike, but we're mostly going cross-country. Roads are on German maps.
The SDR memorises the route, taking care not to mark his map, and heads towards the village. There's the road I came along. I'd better get another landmark to make sure. There, that church. Right. Better than asking the way, questions near the fighting line are dangerous. This DR used his brains instead.
If the BSA left something to be desired, Ron much preferred his replacement.
But fortunately, I was handed a Norton motorcycle. It was lightweight to throw it about and be able to move with it as well. Norton was a very nice machine.
For you, sir. Special dispatch. Thank you. 6 o'clock. I see you left London at 6 o'clock. Yes, sir. That's jolly good time. Thank you, sir.
After cutting his teeth in England, Ron Arnold was posted to Normandy.
We arrive on the beach. Move. Get off the beach. Move, move, move. Move off the beach. So we leave the beach eventually, and we end up in a meadow. In that meadow, my bike in its tarpaulin, it's pulled off, and I am now alive.
In the Second World War, Britain used more motorbikes than any other country. By its end, the manufacturers had made more than 400,000 of them. Throughout the conflict, British society had been exposed to motorcycles like never before. Both the clothing and the machines that had been made for the army would have a lasting impact on how the public viewed bikes in the post-war years. In peacetime, as the bike industry began picking up the pieces, new machines were mostly for export and therefore hard to come by. But it wasn't long before Civvy Street was awash with second-hand bikes, and ex-War Department stock